It was a chilly morning in late March of 1968 when a couple of curious neighborhood kids wandered into the crumbling tenement building on East 10th Street in New York's Lower East Side. They had gone there seeking an adventure, maybe to explore a place that felt haunted by ghostly memories of someone else's past. Instead, they found a startling reality. The lifeless body of a man who looked older than his years, sunk into the dusty floor, with evidence of a tragic end strewn around him. Unbeknownst to anyone in that moment, this was Bobby Driscoll, once Disney's golden child, a boy who had lit up movie screens with his bright eyes, innocent face, and unforced talent. In that lonely building, though, to the world, he was just another forgotten soul, far removed from the stardom that once defined him. No name, no identification, no closure. It took over a year for his mother to learn that her son had been laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Yet decades later, the echo of his voice would persist, forever capturing the spirit of Peter Pan, an eternal child who would never grow up. This is the hidden diary of Bobby Driscoll, Disney's lost boy, whose short life embodies both the shimmering dream and the piercing tragedy of Hollywood's child star machine. In the years following World War II, America was swept up in a tide of optimism that found its way onto movie screens, radios, and later, the newest medium, television. Studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Disney were searching for fresh faces, especially young performers who symbolized a bright and promising future. Family entertainment flourished, and Disney in particular was crafting fantasies that offered reassurance to a war-weary nation. Bobby Driscoll stepped into this pivotal moment. He had those big, soulful eyes that caught the camera in a gentle embrace, plus a smile that radiated all the hope of a country newly awakened from global turmoil. If, as some have suggested, Shirley Temple had been the living embodiment of pre-war innocence, then Bobby Driscoll became the post-war cherub, an emblem of America's can-do spirit in a new era. Born on March 3, 1937 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Bobby was the adored only child of Cletus and Isabel Driscoll. The family's move west came partly out of a search for better economic prospects, and partly for health concerns. Bobby's father suffered from pulmonary issues aggravated by the cold Midwestern winters. By the time the Driscolls arrived in California, the film industry was already in full boom. Unemployment in the Great Depression had led many to try their luck in Hollywood, and even though the worst was over, the city still thrived on the notion that anyone from anywhere might be discovered. Bobby's destiny would, rather famously, unfold in a barbershop. According to one popular story, a barber commented on the boy's photogenic features and suggested he screen test for movies. That offhand suggestion would open a door that led straight to an audition, and not long after, a contract with RKO Pictures. From his very first on-screen moments, it was clear Bobby had a natural charm. He wasn't acting so much as he was simply living in front of the camera. He didn't recite lines like a drilled child performer. Instead, his responses felt spontaneous. In 1946, he earned a small but memorable part in Song of the South, a film combining live action and animation under the Disney banner. That performance, alongside fellow child actress Luana Patton, made them the de facto Disney kids, projecting a wide-eyed innocence that audiences found irresistible. The movie itself was a commercial success at the time, albeit one that's now regarded as deeply problematic for its depictions of race. But for Bobby, Song of the South was a calling card, telling the industry, here is a boy who can anchor a film with both authenticity and magnetism. Wherever Bobby went, photographers snapped away, fans asked for autographs, and studio executives congratulated themselves on finding the next big thing. By the late 1940s, Bobby was one of the most bankable child stars around. In 1949, he won a special Juvenile Academy Award for his roles in So Dear to My Heart and The Window. This would become something of a hallmark for Hollywood at the time. Child actors offered a sense of purity in films that sought to heal the social wounds left by global conflict. No one could have predicted in those days the looming heartbreak that would befall so many of these young talents, each in their own way. But if you look at old interviews and news clippings, there's a subtle hint of the bittersweet. Reporters would allude to how quickly child actors grow and how swiftly Hollywood's affections could fade. At age 10, still baby-faced and beloved, Bobby Driscoll was already on the clock. Yet for the moment, everything seemed like a dream. In 1950, Bobby snagged the role of Jim Hawkins in Disney's first all-live-action film, Treasure Island. Shot primarily in the United Kingdom, this adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's novel was a thrilling departure from the safe pastoral Americana of earlier Disney projects. For a boy who had grown up in the suburban sprawl of California, filming in England was like stepping into an actual storybook. Legendary actor Robert Newton played the flamboyant Long John Silver, giving the performance that would essentially define all future pirate portrayals. Young Bobby, for his part, carried the film on his shoulders. His Jim Hawkins was earnest, curious, and resourceful, traits that Bobby had in real life. The film became a smash hit, cementing Driscoll as a top-tier child actor, but it also introduced him to something else, the transient nature of on-set family. He became close to the British crew and cast, only to realize that once filming ended, these warm, familial bonds dissolved overnight. It was a world so full of love, he supposedly told a reporter, until the camera stops. Then it's goodbye. Returning to Hollywood, Bobby slid seamlessly into new roles. Perhaps his most iconic performance arrived in 1953, when he provided both the voice and the live-action reference for Disney's animated Peter Pan. For many who saw that film in theaters, the voice of Peter, the boy who refuses to grow old, remains inextricable from Driscoll's persona. Filled with boyish bravado, mischief, and a dash of arrogance, his performance captured the essence of a carefree spirit. Yet ironically, as he was breathing life into the eternal child, Bobby was undergoing the very changes that real children can't avoid. His voice began to drop, puberty arrived with its usual brand of awkwardness, and the natural childlike charm that had endeared him to audiences gave way to a self-conscious teen who felt the world's gaze turn critical. In classic Hollywood style, the minute a child star hit adolescence, especially a male child star, there was a question of whether they could seamlessly shift into teen or adult roles. For some, like Mickey Rooney or Judy Garland, the transition was challenging, but they at least had the backing of powerful studios that had a vested interest in nurturing their talents. Bobby Driscoll did not get that level of support. After Peter Pan, Disney, which had once showcased him as a prized jewel, quietly let his contract expire. According to accounts from his family and others who were close to him, Bobby found out about his termination not through a warm discussion or an explanation of what might come next, but by being denied entry when he arrived at the Disney lot. Rumors circulated that Walt Disney himself had grown tired of the boy's hormonal changes and the pesky skin problems that had come with puberty. Whether those rumors were fully accurate or not, the abruptness of that severance was undeniable, and for Bobby, it felt like a deep personal betrayal. It's one of the most poignant narratives of that era. A sweet-natured child discovers that in Hollywood, love and adulation can be heartbreakingly transactional. One of Bobby's acquaintances later recalled him pacing near the studio gates, tears in his eyes, asking, "Why don't they want me anymore? What did I do?" Another friend from that period said, "He was starting to get a few pimples and his voice cracked, and suddenly the phone stopped ringing." According to an often cited but rarely verified quote, Bobby once declared, "I was carried on a satin cushion and then dropped into the garbage." Real or apocryphal, the sentiment sums up how he felt and how many other child stars would feel in the decades to come. After losing Disney's backing, Bobby struggled to land roles. There were smaller parts in TV series and some stage work, but the big studios that had once clamored for him now saw him as an aging child novelty. Some critics still praised his genuine talent, pointing out that he brought dramatic gravitas even to minor roles. But an entire system that had once nurtured him was now turning a blind eye. Friends from high school days recounted how he became moody, withdrawn, and easily provoked if anyone teased him about his time in Hollywood. He found it difficult to stay in regular schooling because of the swirl of emotions and the occasional bullying from peers who were either jealous or just plain cruel. Around 1956 or 1957, the Driscoll family situation also began to erode. Bobby's parents, who had once carefully monitored his career, found themselves increasingly sidelined, both by Bobby himself, who wanted more independence, and by an industry that no longer sought their boy. Tensions at home grew, and Bobby's father had trouble relating to his teenage son, who had lived a life so different from the typical American boy. By then, Bobby had started experimenting with substances. First it was cigarettes and alcohol, then it escalated. Friends introduced him to narcotics, and in the rebellious spirit of someone who feels the world has turned on him, Bobby dove in head first. There's an account from an anonymous childhood friend who later told a writer he didn't like the way he felt being sober, so he tried other ways of feeling better. His transformation from beloved Disney icon to troubled young adult happened faster than anyone could have imagined. By the time he was in his late teens, he had been arrested multiple times for offenses like narcotics possession, petty theft, and passing bad checks. The Juvenile Detention Center replaced the soundstage. Police mugshots replaced the meticulously posed studio portraits. Newspapers that once hailed him as the country's most promising young star now ran stories about his downfalls in their crime sections. The heartbreak was twofold. Not only had Hollywood turned its back on him, but the kid inside Bobby, the one who had once bounded onto sets and made everyone smile, was sinking under a weight that he had no coping skills to lift. Bobby's mother, Isabel, tried for years to rein him in. She pleaded with him to come home, to accept the unconditional love of his family. But Bobby's father, Cletus, now saw their son as a cautionary tale, perhaps even a reminder of how precarious their dream chasing had been. There were fights, there were silent standoffs. Eventually, Bobby drifted out of their household. He took to couch surfing, sometimes disappearing for days or weeks at a time. His high school love interest, an aspiring dancer, tried to stay in touch, but the closeness they once shared vanished into the haze of addiction and the bitterness that Bobby couldn't shake. Remarkably, a few directors who had seen his earlier work still believed in his talent. In the late 1950s, one or two gave him small parts in independent films, but Bobby's reputation by that point preceded him. He was erratic, sometimes arriving on set under the influence. His complexion, once an endearing hallmark of youth, showed signs of scarring from both acne and prolonged substance abuse. On top of that, the Hollywood rumor mill was merciless. Word spread that Bobby was troubled, difficult, or uninsurable. Thus, the studio doors remained firmly locked. Facing mounting legal issues, including a drug possession charge, Bobby attempted to seek treatment. For a short time, he did try to get clean, and there's a record of him checking into a rehabilitation facility. But rehabilitation options in the 1950s were limited, often focusing on moral judgments rather than comprehensive support. Some of Bobby's confessions from that period, quoted in tabloids and gleaned from interviews, reveal his anguish. I know everyone thinks I'm worthless. Maybe I am, but I want to change. That glimmer of self-awareness, though, wasn't matched with the professional help he desperately needed. And so, with no real safety net, Bobby's relapse felt almost inevitable. By the end of the 1950s, he was effectively blacklisted from the major studios. Unable to find stable work in Los Angeles, he began drifting across the country. In some accounts, he hopped on a Greyhound bus to New York, hoping that maybe the city's burgeoning off-Broadway scene or the bohemian enclaves of Greenwich Village might offer him a fresh start. There, in the swirling milieu of poets, painters, musicians, and beatniks, Bobby found a strange refuge. Going by an assumed name, reported variously as Bob or Robert, plus a new surname, he mingled with fellow artists who didn't really care about his past or his once bright fame. He wrote free verse poetry, did some painting, and occasionally performed in little coffeehouse acts. While the anonymity provided relief, it also amplified his sense of dislocation. By day, he was an aspiring artist trying to reclaim his identity. By night, the ghosts of Hollywood haunted him. He later told someone in the village scene that everybody carries a shadow. Mine just has mouse ears. In a testament to how far he had fallen out of public consciousness, very few recognized him as the voice of Peter Pan or the boy from Treasure Island. He was simply another transient figure in a city full of dreamers and drifters. Now and then, he would bring up his old life. Some were skeptical, dismissing him as a fantasist because it sounded too grandiose. Surely that scruffy young man with darting eyes and track marks on his arms couldn't have been the Disney star who once sat on Robert Newton's lap on a film set. The comedic tragedy of it was that Bobby Driscoll had effectively become a lost boy in real life, exiled from the opulent kingdom that once promised him eternal youth. In these last years, Bobby wrestled with a cycle of hope and despair. He'd talk about saving up money to produce a small off-Broadway show or to exhibit his paintings. Then, after a few days of mania and ambition, he'd vanish into the underworld of narcotics, re-emerging weeks later even more destitute. Those who briefly knew him during this period described him as a wounded figure who had glimmers of sweetness, a man who could still flash that childlike grin before the darker shadows closed in again. One Greenwich Village acquaintance recalled a chilling conversation. He told me his body felt like a prison, that he was stuck as a child in an adult form, and the walls were shrinking every day. The comparison to Peter Pan was inescapable, a child star who had never learned how to grow up in a real adult world, drifting further from any version of safety or stability. On March 30th, 1968, Bobby's body was discovered in that rundown tenement building in the East Village. No ID, no note. The police, with no leads, chalked it up to another drug-related tragedy. He was sent to the city morgue unclaimed. After a period of time, he was buried in a pauper's grave on Hart Island, a potter's field for the unclaimed, where each plot is marked by a simple numeric identifier. The final indignity. A star who had once been greeted by throngs of admirers was laid to rest anonymously as if he had never existed. Not until over a year later did his mother succeed in tracing her son's last steps. By then, the remains could only be identified through fingerprint records that linked him to a prior arrest. Thus ended the tragic story of Disney's once brightest child star. Yet the story doesn't truly end there, does it? Decades later, the cultural fascination with child stars, those angelic figures who seem so adored and yet are so often cast aside, keeps Bobby Driscoll's memory alive. He remains a cautionary tale, a symbol of how the Hollywood system can exploit youth and innocence, only to discard them when they are no longer profitable. Friends of Bobby claim that even near the end, he clung to the idea that someday the industry might call him back. His love for performance was genuine, overshadowed only by the heartbreak of rejection and the self-destructive spiral of addiction. The controversies surrounding Bobby Driscoll's life and death have reverberated through the decades. Disney's role in his abrupt dismissal is often scrutinized. Some argue that Walt Disney, a man with a famously fatherly public persona, should have offered more guidance. Others maintain that Disney was running a business, not a daycare, and that the realities of show business inevitably crush many child performers. There's debate over whether Driscoll was difficult to handle on set toward the end. His fans and the sparse lines of personal testimony suggest otherwise. They claim his meltdown came after the studio cut him loose. In truth, it's probably a bit of both. Puberty can be tough, and teenage rebellion plus the weight of stardom can create friction. But studios in that era had little patience for even minor disruptions. One must also consider the cultural climate of 1950s America. The golden age of Hollywood was still flush with money but deeply riddled with hypocrisy. The studios had moral clauses, policing the personal lives of actors, and many of the era's biggest stars hid substance issues or personal traumas from the public. Child actors rarely received psychological support or counseling to handle the extremes of fame. Shirley Temple once remarked how strange it was to be adored by millions, yet hardly known by anyone in her personal life. For a boy like Bobby, with fewer support systems, that sense of isolation was severe. The result was a tragedy waiting to happen. Why does Bobby Driscoll's story still matter today? Because he personifies the dark side of Hollywood's youth worship. He was a living fairy tale, a bright-eyed child in an age hungry for hope, who found stardom and wealth at a tender age. Then, just as swiftly, he was abandoned. His fall sheds light on the exploitative patterns we still see. The names may be different: a child actor from a Disney Channel series, a teen pop star, or a reality TV sensation. The machinery remains eerily the same. Bobby's cautionary tale foreshadows the well-known struggles of later generations of young talents. Some manage to break free and reshape their adult identities. Others succumb to the same heartbreak, addiction, despair, and an early grave. We can also draw broader cultural significance from Bobby's life. He came of age at a time when America was telling itself a triumphant narrative about progress and prosperity. Post-war suburban expansion, the baby boom, and the mid-century modern dream formed a shimmering facade that concealed the growing pains of a society still wrestling with anxiety, prejudice, and shifting values. Child stars were the perfect symbols of a bright future, but behind the scenes, studios were notoriously controlling. When those children grew up, audiences and executives lost interest. If anything, Bobby's story underscores how easily a cheerful public image can be shattered by callous business practices and public indifference. His story evokes further questions about identity and belonging. Bobby so desperately wanted to remain in the sphere where he once thrived. The bright sets, the approving eyes of directors, but the natural order of human growth wouldn't allow it. Once those childlike features faded, so too did Hollywood's interest. The heartbreak lies in the sense that Bobby could not find a new identity once the old one was taken from him. In this sense, Bobby is, indeed, the real-life Peter Pan, forever frozen in the popular imagination, as a wide-eyed boy, immortalized in an iconic voice performance that suggests eternal youth. while his actual self was forced to drift in obscurity, never truly able to cross that threshold into adulthood with support or acceptance. Yet amid the tragedy, there is also a hint of inspiration, if we look carefully. Despite his destructive patterns, Bobby had a genuine passion for art and poetry in his final years. He sought to express himself through words and paint, exploring the beatnik scene. That creative spark never extinguished, even if it was overshadowed by addiction and despair. It's a reminder that no life is purely defined by success or failure in the commercial sense. He harbored an artist's soul, and that's something that deserves recognition beyond his downfall. In interviews from decades later, a few of Bobby's contemporaries, actors and studio workers from the 1940s and 1950s, spoke warmly of him. One camera operator who had worked on Treasure Island mentioned that Driscoll was the sweetest kid you'd ever meet, always curious about the equipment, about how the camera worked, about why the lights were set a certain way. Another colleague from the Disney studios recalled that Walt Disney once told a gathering of staff, "He's got the kind of sincerity you just can't fake," referring to Bobby's on-screen presence. Whether or not Walt personally severed ties or let the boy drift away, the fact that he recognized that spark of sincerity is part of Bobby's legacy. There's also a deeper moral element in the cautionary tale. How do we care for vulnerable people once they've outgrown their initial usefulness to us? In Bobby's case, the result was heartbreakingly clear, but it resonates in many spheres of life. We live in a society that prizes novelty and newness. Whether that's a new smartphone, a new trend, or a new child star, the temptation to discard the old in pursuit of the next big thing is strong. Bobby's life compels us to question that impulse. If we take anything from his story, perhaps it's the need for compassion toward those whose moment in the spotlight has passed, or who are struggling to adapt to life changes most of us can only imagine. Today, the name Bobby Driscoll might not hold the same mainstream recognition as, say, Judy Garland or even child stars who came after him. But if you search YouTube, you'll find documentary segments titled things like "The Boy Who Voiced Peter Pan Was Left to Die" and "Disney's Abandoned Child Star." Millions of views and countless comments reflect a public grappling with this disturbing piece of Hollywood history. Why are we drawn to such stories? Possibly because they reveal that the fantasy offered by film can mask an unsettling reality. Possibly because they reflect our own anxieties about aging, irrelevance, and the ephemeral nature of fame. Or perhaps because, at heart, we still feel a pang of guilt for the child inside that boy who believed in magic, but was never given the chance to safely grow up. A seldom noted fact, in some of Bobby's final weeks, he crafted a series of drawings, abstract sketches, heavily influenced by the expressionist movement. One friend who briefly housed him in a cramped studio apartment recalled seeing these drawings scattered around. They were mostly just swirling lines, the friend said, but you could sense a frantic energy, like he was trying to capture something that was slipping away. The same friend also mentioned Bobby reciting lines from a poem he'd written about an everlasting childhood locked in a basement. If only someone had been able to help him channel that creative energy into a path forward. But such help never truly arrived. When asked in an interview about his younger years, Bobby reportedly once said, "I never wanted to be an idol. I only wanted to act." That single sentence encapsulates much of his fate. He didn't ask for the pressure of being the face of post-war American innocence. He simply loved to perform and was good at it. So good that it made him the center of a powerful studio's ambitions. Then, ironically, when puberty knocked, that same studio had no use for him. The emotional whiplash is painfully palpable. Bobby's life also mirrors a broader question about whether child stardom is ever truly healthy. The fast money, the adult environment, the avalanche of adoration from strangers, all of it can warp a young mind. For Bobby, these adult demands collided fiercely with normal adolescent turbulence. Without guidance or a clear transition plan, he was cast adrift. That sense of abandonment, combined with the easy availability of drugs in mid-century Hollywood's hidden nightlife, set a tragic trajectory. Even now, watchers of old Disney films can't help but smile at the bright animated performance behind Peter Pan. That's Bobby Driscoll at his purest, playful, confident, unburdened by life's tragedies. The knowledge that he died alone as a John Doe intensifies our reaction. We recognize how illusions can be built on shaky foundations, and how the unwavering glow of childhood innocence in film can obscure real-life sorrows. It's precisely the tension between those illusions and that reality that keeps us transfixed by his story. Some fans and historians have lobbied for a more formal memorial for Bobby. His final resting place on Hart Island remains unmarked, part of a mass burial ground. There have been petitions asking Disney to acknowledge his contributions, with more than a passing mention in the annals of the studio's history. Occasionally, there's talk of a small statue or plaque, though nothing official has come to pass. Perhaps the issue is that acknowledging Bobby Driscoll's tragic fate would also involve confronting the ruthless nature of how child stardom has historically been managed. While Disney is known for celebrating certain historical figures, animators, composers, and visionaries, Bobby's case is a ghost at the banquet, an uncomfortable reminder that not every fairy tale ends with a happily ever after. As our journey through Bobby Driscoll's life winds down, we're left with the haunting image of that deserted building in New York, where he drew his final breath, unknown and forgotten by the city that bustled outside. We're also left with an undeniable sense of heartbreak that the boy who was once the face of Disney's family-friendly entertainment died in the most unfamily-friendly circumstances. If there's a flicker of solace, it might be that his story has not been erased. Those who discover it, whether through old newspaper clippings, YouTube documentaries, or in the whispered lore of Disney history, cannot easily forget the face that once graced so many screens. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.